Hello everyone, and welcome to the May edition of Cyber Samurai Cipher, where we talk about ongoing exploits, cybersecurity news, all the fun stuff that we look forward to every month, right? Alrighty, so today we're going to have kind of a new topic. It's AI related, which is of course all the rage these days, but something's happened in AI that honestly, the cybersecurity industry doesn't handle this topic well. We're always Chicken Little, always thinking that the sky is falling, and we don't do a great job of really educating and coming up with good game plans for what to do. And so that's what I'm going to cover today. Is there's been a new tool that's been developed that really is the first of its kind. So let's just get into it. The agenda today, we're going to talk about Anthropic Mythos, and then something I learned in a previous job called the continuity, not easy to say, of operations planning. So what does that all mean? So anyway, let's get into Anthropic. So a little over a month ago now, a month and a week or two, on April 7th, Anthropic, which if you don't know is just an AI developing company. They are writing the code that is AI, one of many, and they have been in the news recently for a couple other things, some government contracts and whatnot, but they did announce that they've had a breakthrough where now their Claude code, you probably have heard of Claude at this point from someone in IT. But anyway, there's a specific version of Claude that's Mythos preview at the time. I don't know if it's still called that a month later because AI changes so quickly. But the real issue is that there have been a lot of AI models before that have been able to kind of discover exploits, but none of them were really good at creating a proof of concept or a working exploit. It was like, hey, there's this issue here, we know it, AI can find it, but it took a lot of human intervention to actually, one, prove that it was real, two, make a working exploit for it. So Mythos is really the first one of its kind where it can do the entire chain from beginning to end, where it can find vulnerabilities, create a working exploit, and they seem to be high quality. Whereas I remember there was some bug bounty company, I can't remember who it was now, but they were turning down a don't tell us about any AI generated vulnerabilities because we're just so tired of thinking that this is an issue, and they go and they look and it's like none of this is real, like this is all theoretical or all that sort of stuff. But it seems like Mythos is unlike that, and they've used it to find exploits, sometimes dozens, hundreds of exploits in all major operating systems, all major browsers, some protocols. They've thrown it against open source and closed source software. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, and you hear different conflicting news sometimes, so it's kind of hard to know what's true, but I've heard it is reverse engineered closed source. I mean, theoretically that's possible, especially for something of this scale where we always knew this was coming, because in theory AI should always be able to understand code more deeply than a human because it's its native language, whereas humans are always going to fail when it comes to human logic or computer logic in certain categories. You know, like in chess, like humans cannot beat an AI now, and I mean that's been for years now. So theoretically, taking the humans out of the mix is probably where this had to go at some point. So it's not surprising that a tool like this would come about. So anyway, in short, Mythos is a zero-day generator. It's done a whole bunch of different things, but a lot of what it is that it can find things in code that even highly scrutinized by a human code or teams of humans, and it will find things that have been in there since the code was written sometimes. I mean, some of the stuff it found was like 27-year-old issues in the code. I've heard some of the descriptions, of like these race conditions where it'll start, 3 or 4 processes, and as long as number 2 completes before number 4 does, then you can take over the kernel of an operating system. Just crazy stuff that like humans wouldn't be able to think that deeply and that complexly and keep all of that in their head. And so this is really bringing about to light that human written code can't stand up against tools like this. So they had Anthropic had an invite-only meeting where I believe they asked several big vendors for their closed source code of operating systems and browsers and whatnot. And as far as I know, I haven't been able to find that anyone published their results except for Mozilla. Maybe the others have by now, but Mozilla announced that in their most recent release, I think it was 147 at the time, and it found 271 vulnerabilities in it. And Firefox is it's usually regarded as the most secure browser. That kind of security is one of their big things. And so for this tool to be able to find those is kind of crazy. It's turned a lot of the industry upside down because just the amount of vulnerabilities that it's able to find in some very, very core places that aren't easy to fix. They may not even be fixable because they're a limitation of old hardware, and so replacing the hardware might be required. As far as I know, nobody has pointed Mythos at TCP, which is Transport Control Protocol, which in many ways literally is the internet. There is no internet without TCP. It is what runs all the packets and how they schedule each other and how routing works and all this stuff. So I did a little research, and that code was written in 1974, and of course it's had updates since then. But as soon as somebody points an engine like this, it's very likely the end of the internet age as we know it. Some of the issues that it found were in FreeBSD, which is considered the most secure operating system and is rumored to be what Cloudflare in Google runs for the world's DNS, for the internet DNS. And anybody in the security world that's done networking knows DNS causes a lot of problems. If you want to break an entire network, all you do is mess with DNS. Egypt did it several years ago where they wanted to bring their whole country off the internet. They just powered off their DNS servers, and all of a sudden, no one can get to the internet unless you want to start memorizing IP addresses. And, some people figured out some weird hack workarounds or whatnot, but by and large, that's all it takes. So if this thing's able to take down FreeBSD and keep it down the way it was in the test, I'm not sure that that's fixable. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but it's just really making a paradigm shift where things that have never happened before are likely to happen here coming soon. And so here's the official, I don't know why it's in this crazy blue color and the other one isn't, but here's their official announcement, and then there's one article that kind of goes into some more of the details of the operating systems and the browsers and whatnot that Mythos has been able to find vulnerabilities in. So the advent of this tool has created something called the Cloud Security Alliance. Ooh, we love our names in this industry. In a lot of ways, it's a who's who. They just wrote a document, but it's like a who's who of the IT and the cybersecurity industry. There's big hitters in there. Like this, I think CISO of Cloudflare, I think Google's in there, SANS, which is a great security organization. Man, they've been around forever. I think the list is 30 or 40 of these top tier industry leading type of individuals have come together and created a document. And I've linked it here at the bottom in case it interests you, but it really is, okay everyone, things have changed. We've not always done a great job of talking about how the sky is falling at times, but this type of a tool is able to just change how the internet is going to work. And so they have some recommendations, some interesting facts over the last several years. One of them was this timeline. Then in 2018, from the time a CVE, I think it's common vulnerability and exploit, it just means like, hey, we know we have an issue in our code. And typically CVEs get published when the fix is done. They try to keep it under wraps until there's a fix and you can go and get the update yourself. But anyways, from the moment the CVE was published in 2018 to when they started seeing active in the wild was around 2.3 years was the average. And now we're down to 9 hours in 2026. And the thing is with Mythos, you don't even have time to make CVEs. I mean, there's 0 days, which means it's never been seen before. And so it's just a complete paradigm shift. The tools were already heading that way. Hacking was already getting faster and faster and faster, and then this is just accelerating into a whole new level. So I've been kind of chewing on this for the last month, and was this had come out the last time that I did the Cipher meeting. I really just kind of wanted to think about this a little bit more and come up with a response, because I didn't want to just add to the clamor of, oh, the sky's falling, blah, blah, blah. But really, what can we do about it? That's one of the whole purposes of this podcast is just not just here's the latest news, but how can we react to it? So it took me back to something I learned in a previous job, and it's called continuity, my goodness, operations planning, or COOP plans, we call them. And really what that is just you take some scenarios and you say, okay, even though this would be catastrophic if this happened, what are we going to do if it does? So, what if the building burns down? What if this CEO starts defacing our website? What if, things that like maybe aren't things that you would typically think about, but this is kind of a new scenario. So I'm applying that mentality to this sort of a thought. So with Mythos in play. So if we go through some of these scenarios, what would it look like if the internet was untrustworthy? What if, to be connected to the internet means that you get hacked into, because the tools have become so powerful. As soon as you plug in something, it's just hacked into. I mean, I'm not saying that's happening now, but it's worth thinking about and at least considering having a plan. So what would remote work look like for your company if all of a sudden VPN, you can't have a VPN port open and listening all the time? How would people get work done? How would you share information? What would it look like to have 0 services exposed to the internet? Do you have a public website? Do you have a place where your employees log in and they have to chart their hours? Or do you have databases where people have to look up information? If those needed to be off the internet, how would your business do that? How could you have an internal database only that isn't internet accessible? A lot of these attacks are they're so complicated, there's so many chains that I guarantee you the tools like the managed service detection tools, the MDRs and XDR tools will not be able to get there quickly enough, and there will be damage done by tools before those the good guy tools can react and can stop these sort of things. And so what happens if there's damage done before you can stop it? I mean, just look at Stryker. Look at what happened to their company. Their 200-some thousand devices or whatever it was got wiped before they could stop it. And that's what would happen to your company if that happened. Or do you have the tools? Do you have even just the practical installers and license keys to be able to reinstall your virtual machine software, to get spreadsheets up and working again? Being in a situation like that becomes very practical very quickly, of just, we need to get this server going. I don't have the install media or CD or USB drive or whatever that it takes to actually get this reinstalled. Think on a very practical level. this isn't huge pie in the sky like sort of stuff. This is just very like there should be a flash drive with the installers and the product keys that you have that is never plugged into anything that's internet connected, that's just sitting over on a shelf or somebody has somewhere that you could use in an emergency situation like that. Also, do you have any budget in your company for new hardware, for contractors if you needed to rebuild your infrastructure from scratch? This was I believe this was in 2023, this Barracuda article. You can look at it if you're interested in it. But this is way before, crazy AI tools that we have as of 2026. And even back then, Barracuda, that's a firewall company, came out and said they got hacked so deeply that it was so burned into the firmware in the physical hardware on their devices. They said you have to rip out our devices and replace the hardware, because we can never really be sure that the hackers are gone. So I mean that was 3 years ago, and that was a capability that wasn't theoretical. That happened, and so now it's like, if these tools are so powerful, that who knows what's going to happen. You could get a rootkit in there that like you physically can't use the same hardware anymore, because as soon as you bring it online, it just does whatever the malware does, and so do you have a little budget do you have like maybe 2 of the core servers that you would need to run your company, and one's offline or a cold spare sort of a concept? Also, have you listed the assets and just the critical data that you would need to rebuild your company? Being in a emergency situation like that, do you have a list anywhere of people to contact? Who could rebuild this from scratch? What would HR need? What's the minimum HR would need to stay operating, or finance, to run payroll? These 4 systems involved in payroll. Do you still have a check printer that would need special cartridges or whatever? I think that's not a thing anymore, but think through all the different scenarios. Could IT find the licensing that's required to even just get through the installers to activate the server key, licenses to get servers back up and running, all that sort of stuff. So it's worth just making the list. Like, take a day, take 2 days, talk to some of the different departments, and just what's the minimum that you would take in an emergency situation just to keep working. Also, it's with some of the operating systems that have been mentioned, being able to take down FreeBSD really is interesting. That could change how the internet works. If Google and Cloudflare couldn't stay up or couldn't serve DNS to the world, what would that look like? You couldn't get into Microsoft or AWS or these Salesforce, these big vendors. What would that mean? Do you have a backup of that data? If you couldn't log into those cloud services for an hour, a week, a month, I have no idea what's coming. None of us do. But just think through, when was the last time you exported information from those tools? The spreadsheets that are in your, Google Workspace or Microsoft Cloud. Have you done a backup of that? Have you tested that in the last week, month, year even? It would be worth your time to make sure that those are operating correctly. Also, it's time to think outside of the box. So this has already become more and more of a thing, but especially since GitHub got hacked into, and NPM, which I didn't know what NPM was. I'm not a developer. I didn't know what that was until about 4 months ago. But that's a network packet manager, I think is what it stands for. And it's essentially like you have an app, and it has all these little dependencies, these libraries. And so NPM's the tool that keeps all those libraries up to date. Well, guess what? It got hacked. And where a lot of those libraries are stored in GitHub, that also got hacked. I forget if it was this year or tail end of last year. But either way, there have been multiple supply chain attacks after that. And my favorite password manager, Bitwarden, they were pushing malicious code for, I think it was 93 hours, where they had a supply chain hack, where way up here, a hacker would put in malicious code, and that gets pushed into a library that gets pushed all the way down into the Bitwarden app. And then they caught it because they're a security company, but they are hyper vigilant when it comes to all things security. That's what their company does, and they pushed malware for 90 some hours. If you did your updates in that 90-hour window, like, you got malware from your updates. I mean, that's becoming more and more common. So, thinking out of the box, how would you block if Microsoft, if Apple, if Linux distributions got hacked and you needed to keep them from doing their updates? You know, how would you even keep Windows 11 from doing an update? Good luck these days, because that service, it used to be like you stopped the Windows Update service and you wouldn't get it, but a long time ago they stopped letting people do that, where you're a full admin in PowerShell and you can't stop that service. I mean, you will get your updates. Okay, so what if your company decides that it's too risky? You know, how would you have a technical plan to actually implement that? And also, this one's become really interesting to me. With the advent of AI and a lot of people relying on AI, I've noticed that some people have become dependent on AI, where the skills that would be required to rebuild an organization from scratch may not actually be in your IT staff. Like, they may rely so heavily on AI. What happens in the future if loss to all AI happens, where, you know, governments or whatever decide, you know, AI is so powerful we can't let people have it, and they strip it off the internet? What would happen if your company gets hacked and AI is not available and you need to be able to build this up from scratch? Does your team have the skills to be able to do that? What would it take for them to do that? It's kind of an interesting HR politics kind of a question, but it's worth pursuing. Of, you know, can you make offline libraries? Can you have, you know, at least some? I mean, manuals aren't really a thing anymore. It shows how old I am. The books on the shelf, you know, like, oh, this is how Windows NT works. You know, those don't really exist anymore. But maybe it's worth pursuing that a little bit and just see, like, you know, standardize on an operating system that you can find a manual for and you can understand, you're familiar with. But anyway, so that was the main place that my mind went as soon as these tools. It's easy to get scared with these tools, and, like, clearly nothing like this seems to have happened before. A one tool that can just tear apart, I mean, all the major operating systems and everything. It's crazy, but at the same time, it's not magic. You know, like, people sometimes talk about AI like it's absolute magic, and at the end of the day, it can probably outwit us in many areas with computing, but there's still hard and fast rules. There are, you know, air-gapped networks that would be very, very difficult to exploit. There's cold spares that, you know, it can't cross certain thresholds, you know, and so it's a time to think through kind of those different scenarios of, if things get weird, how would your company respond? And I believe that those companies that really take a lot of this seriously and have a game plan will fare much better if something crazy should happen, where, you know, you really can rebuild your infrastructure, your core infrastructure from scratch. And honestly, running some tabletop exercises, or even just, like, have a lab and try to rebuild, spend a day or two, try to rebuild, you know, core functions of your company and see if you can get it working enough to where people could connect and continue working in some sort of crazy scenario. Who knows what we're in for? It's exciting, it's crazy, and also scary, and all the things. And that's my update for the month. Is just really seems like things are changing a corner. I don't understand if these tools are this powerful, how the internet can stay the way it is in the next 6 months or a year. It just really doesn't make any sense. Like, the bar is so low for anybody to be able to do this. And if we've learned one thing, In security, its attacks only get better, where there's nothing special about Anthropic. There's going to be another company that does it and does it better. There's going to be malicious actors that steal the code or, just write their own that's even better. I mean, this sort of a tool is just the first of its kind. I think will be commonplace in the future, and so that it's just worth exploring as a company. It would be wise to have a plan of, the best plan is like you make all these, supplies and plans or whatever, and you never need it. Well, that doesn't mean you wasted your time by having a good plan. That's the wise and prudent thing to do. So anyway, I hope we all have a safe next month and we can meet again, and I thank you all for your time.